Thank you up there. Righto. So, this session is a little celebration of Miles Franklin and indeed of prizes generally. It's very, very rare to get two Miles Franklin shortlistees, let alone a shortlistee and the winner, in the same room. We're very, very lucky, because normally if you did that, they'd be clawing at each other like bantam roosters. So this is really quite exceptional. Now, I think because we're all readers, this is one of those kind of needs no introduction situations, but I'm going to do one anyway, so just bear with me a little bit. Jen, to my immediate right, was twice a Sydney Morning Herald Best Young Australian Novelist. Is that the correct title?
I think so.
Sounded good.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah. Author of Our Magic Hour and Pulse Points, which one is still read. A life-changing, I think that's a fair word here, run of success started with last year's novel, Bodies of Light, of course. It was runner-up in the 2022 Vic Premiers, and in the Age Book of the Year, and in the Barbara Jeffress, and then, of course, it won the Miles Franklin, which is just a tremendous achievement, and congratulations. Michael Winkler, a little further along the line there, lives in Melbourne but has Tallangatta history. And Michael is one of the many, many joys of... What did I do?
Are you not going to correct them?
What's it called? Come on.
Tallangatta.
Tallangatta. Do you reckon there are any locals in the room? And I was about to say one of the many joys of knowing Jo, but I'm sure is that she introduced me to Michael. I first knew of Michael as an essayist. If you need a Winkler primer, you could start with Happy Days, or you could read, I got that, or you could read The Great Red Whale, which is a marvellous, marvellous essay that you wrote quite a few years ago now.
2016, yeah.
Right, yeah, highly recommended. It won a thing called the Calibre Essay Prize. Michael continues to write elegant, thoughtful non-fiction of all kinds, including reviews. Which is a little in-joke between he and I. It was the self-publication of a book called Grimmish that changed everything for Michael Winkler, that brought everybody's attention to him, and more about that in just a minute. So if you worry at all, as I do, about a creeping sameness in Australian fiction, then these are the two people who have fought back very, very hard against that, and we're all indebted to them, I think, for that. Now, I wanted to start, I don't think I can put on a Nick Cave voice, but anyway, Nick Cave once said a thing in 1996, and here I go, this is kind of elaborate, but it's a setup, okay? She comes to me. I need like a walnut pearl, basically.
You need a tux, is what you need.
Yes, a lot of hair. She comes to me with the gift of song. He's talking about his muse, by the way, because you will be wondering in a second. She comes to me with the gift of song, and in return I treat her with the respect that I feel she deserves. In this case, this means not subjecting her to the indignities of judgment and competition. My muse is not a horse, and I am in no horse race. And if indeed she was, I would still not harness her to this tumbrel, this bloody cart of severed heads and glittering prizes. My muse may spook, may abandon me completely. So, this is finally my opening question. Do you guys feel that subjecting your work to prizes and to competition in some way damages it or spooks the muse?
Do you want to?
No, please.
It's fairly unequivocal. I don't. I mean, it's a huge. We could probably both write theses about this. I think prizes are inherently subjective, and there's a great deal of timing and luck and opinion and all of that goes into any of them. But by the same token, one of the only financial opportunities for writers in this country, only significant financial opportunities, and they are also, prizes like the Miles Franklin and the Stella, and not very many others, to be quite honest. Not that there are not worthy and good prizes aside from those, but in real terms, those are the only two prizes I think that really have an impact in terms of book sales. And so I would, even before I won the Miles Franklin, I would be really cutting off my nose to spite my face if I said to my publisher, don't bother entering my stuff into any competitions or awards ever. Because the reality is I'm not rich enough to, to not want a bit of extra cash and financial security. And the shiny sticker thing on the front is really important for book sales. And all of this might sound really sort of ugly and mercenary and kind of uncouth to talk about, right? We like to think of art as having, art as being for art's sake. And it is, but there's a certain, put it this way, I never expected anything from prizes, but the financial support and the external validation they can provide, and not necessarily winning a prize, but being long or shortlisted, which is, I've been fortunate enough to have that happen. That is not to be underestimated, I think. And so, I don't know, I have a very complex relationship to prizes, as you can tell probably, but I think it's also important to recognise that, prizes don't make a book, of course, and winning a prize doesn't make a book good. It doesn't mean it's for everybody. There's probably plenty of people who will pick up my book because it won a big prize and bloody hate it. No doubt of that. But by the same token, they can have a life-changing impact as well. What do you think?
Thanks, Jen. Look, in terms of your question, Jock, in terms of Grimish, prizes were a complete afterthought. There was no impact. In terms of that essay that won the Calibre Award, that's interesting because I'd written the essay, but I went back and sort of snazzed it up a bit and put in some $10 words that I thought would attract the attention of the ABE. I was aware of who the judges were for that award, and I look back now and I'm a bit sad that there are so many, that there's language in the first part of that essay in particular that might inhibit a general reader. So in that case, there were deliberate strategies hoping to at least attract their attention enough that they would press on and read it, consider it for the prize. But yeah, in terms of muse, etc., no, that's
Maybe if we start with this for a moment, this was a self-published novel which, if I've got the sequence right, then got onto the long list for the Miles, then found a publisher, and then got onto the short list.
not quite.
Not quite. Or in any event, can you take us through what Grimish is and the story of how all that came to pass?
Sure thing. Look, I'll keep it brief because I think it's a well-told tale now, but it was a book that I wrote, and it's now, 3 years ago or something, 4 years ago. An agent liked it and sent it around to every credible, likely Australian publisher, and no one wanted it. And then I was thinking, what do I do? And I'd self-published a couple of non-fiction books, and I thought, I'll do this, even though it made my heart sink. So I self-published it, and it was very fortunate in that it found some champions, particularly on Twitter, and I know that social media can be a sewer, but in this case it connected me with interested, excited readers in different parts of the world, and they started talking about it, and that got enough of a groundswell going, and Joe Canham foisted it on Helen Garner, who said kind things, and this lifted it up enough so that I sold out my print run, and then I thought I can't do this again, and happily a little publisher up in Newcastle took it on, and then the happy thing for them was that about a month later it got longlisted, and so it's become their best-selling book by a long way, which is
And Jen, with you, Bodies of Light it's a long, deep, complex, harrowing novel. There's an awful lot of you in it. What was your personal ambition for the novel as you were writing it? Did you think you were putting everything out there and that you wanted it to have the impact that it's had?
No. Sorry, this is actually something I've been thinking about a lot because I'm meant to be doing I say meant to be because I'm going to a speech at Melbourne Writers Festival on Thursday about ambition. That's not a plug, don't come, I haven't written it. I'm not an ambitious person, I don't think so. Kind of makes me feel sweaty and unwell thinking about ambition. And I think, as an inherently anxious person, I cannot, I spend my days, day-to-day interactions, worried about what other people are thinking based on what I've done. Did I accidentally offend someone? I could have held that door open for someone, but I didn't, and now they probably think I'm a huge prick. That sort of stuff, I didn't indicate what just shit like that. And, I'm not alone. I know there are several of us out there who feel the same. But as a very kind of anxious person, if I started writing for a purpose or with a certain audience in mind when I was writing the first draft, I would just second guess myself into, the ninth circle of hell. And I think that probably goes against what a lot of creative writing teachers would say. I know, I sometimes hear people say, write with an audience in mind, or always think about how your reader will interpret this. But I can't think about a reader until I'm kind of, I don't know, nipples deep in a third draft or something. It's just, I can't, it has to be for me first. I have to be happy with it, and not even happy with it. I always say to students, the first time you write the story is just you telling it to yourself. That's all the first draft is. And you kind of write your way to the end of the story and figure it out. And so it's probably not a satisfying answer, but it has necessarily, for me, it has to be small and kind of private and intimate, because otherwise I would never finish it. I would just be kind of, I think paralysed by insecurity.
This is, as I was just saying before, this is very moving and indeed upsetting material in places. How do you go, given that self-description of yours, how do you go from being immersed in this for a long time to create the novel to then coming out blinking into the light and needing to be celebratory with people about it? Does that feel strange?
Yeah, definitely. I think I finished writing and researching the novel maybe a year before it, or maybe a little more before it came out. It was quite a long editing process, partly because of lockdown and things like that. But it really took me, I had a huge sort of book hangover from it because the material, is really heavy, and heavy is an understatement. I spent about 3 years reading and listening to and thinking about the worst possible things imaginable and all of the different ways that the state fails our most vulnerable young people and has done historically, and that certainly makes it made me look at the world in quite a I don't want to say cynical way, because it's reality. It's not me thinking the worst of things. It's seeing the worst and knowing that that's what happens and has happened for decades. But it's a strange thing to, I think, more than going from dark subject matter to celebration. And I don't know if you feel the same, Michael. I think the weird thing is going from working on something that's so private, and I know some people share drafts with writing groups or friends. I don't do that. I didn't show anyone my book until my editor was the first person to read it, and then all of a sudden it's got this audience, as soon as it's published. And then if you're fortunate enough for it to be longlisted or shortlisted, it finds a slightly wider audience. And of course you're grateful for that as a writer, enormously grateful, but there's something very, you're being exposed, you're opening yourself up to exposure and to criticism and all of those things, and that for me felt quite sudden and jolting. It's you go from working on something that's just you and your laptop, and then there's maybe one or two other people involved, like an editor or a publisher or a book designer, and then anyone can read it, and you can't control for what they might think or how they might feel or how it might impact them, and you just kind of have to relinquish control.
It just made me think of how irrational it is that you spend all this time thinking, God, I wish someone would read my book. I wish someone would read my book. Shit, they're reading my book. Could you tell us a little bit about the evening, the presentation, the moment of winning, and kind of slow motion us through how that felt, and then also the crazy family celebrations that I saw in the media?
So I knew that I had won ahead of time, but I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. I told a few people. I told my family, obviously. That was how they planned such a tasteful celebration. But yeah, it was kind of funny. Like, it was sorry, firstly, I don't want to like hang shit on anybody or like make it sound like I'm ungrateful, because that's not the case at all. But when I received the award, it was like there was a video producer who'd come to shoot like a little video that they play when, at the digital ceremony, and they wanted to record in St Kilda for some reason. The book's not set in St Kilda. I've never lived in St Kilda, but we went there anyway. And we're kind of walking around, taking all this B-roll footage of like me walking, over this overpass again and again, and like I'm very uncomfortable. And they just kept saying, "Can you just walk normally?" I was doing like this like Peter Garrett. Just my jaw getting more and more clenched. Anyway, and then I was like, all right, well, thanks for this. And they were like, oh, hang on, we've got something to give you. And I'm like, oh, wacko. Anyway, it was the Miles Franklin trophy, and they handed it to me in like a post-pack bag. By the side, like kind of outside of the SB in St Kilda. And I was like, I'm not somebody who particularly likes a ceremony anyway, so in some ways it was perfect, but I was just like, if I ever imagine winning a prize. And so I think I called my best mate, and I called my mum, and I was like, this really funny thing just happened. And I told a few people, and they were all kind of indignant on my behalf, and I was like, no, it's perfect. Like, they knew that I was like a garbage person, and they were like, she has to get this at a roadside. Also, I spilled coffee on my jeans. I was wearing white jeans, I spilled coffee on my jeans. So like, it was completely perfect. Anyway, that was kind of the genesis, which I haven't talked about in media because I didn't want the Miles Franklin people to think I was like having a diva fit or like unhappy that I got it in a post-pack bag. But so I think that was the background to my family, planning this silly ceremony. But it was just funny. It was the Wednesday, Tuesday, I don't know, it was a weekday. The ceremony was online, it was at 4 p.m. I have a 9 to 5 or 8 to 7 day job, and I was working that all day. And then I drove to my parents' house to kind of celebrate with them. And I had a really busy day at work, and so I was I wasn't shitty, but I was like, kind of, my mind was in other places, and I'd driven to their house kind of mentally making a list of like emails I had to send for work, and I was like, I've got this call at 6, I hope this is done, and I arrived, and they just made this very silly, they had like a red carpet that was a sheet of red plastic, like what you would have like a slip and slide or like an abattoir, and then my sister had made up t-shirts that just said things like, hot people read bodies of light, and mother of the Miles Franklin winner, father of the Miles Franklin winner. And they printed out in like Times New Roman, like A4 printed paper, all of these signs that just sort of said signings with the Miles Franklin winner. And then labels like certain chairs or like the fold-out couch that I sleep on when I visit my parents. There was a little poster above that just said Miles Franklin winner sleeps here. And it was kind of perfect, and yeah, it was a very low-key celebration. Like it was ideal because I think if like Michael and I both attended the shortlist ceremony in Sydney, which was lovely, but the reality is like we met each other earlier that morning at the airport, and you were probably the person I knew best there.
Wow.
My publisher was there. But like, the reality is that if you go to a ceremony thing, lovely, but there's always a sense of like, I don't really know anyone there. I I'm usually wearing something that I'm a bit uncomfortable in, or
You did take a change of clothes.
yeah. Yeah. But it's it was just nice to be able to kind of celebrate in a way that felt authentic. No, it felt like appropriate to who I am and to my family.
Thank you. Michael, can you help us out with the very enigmatic phrase that is used for the Miles Franklin, which is that it's a novel that presents Australian life in all of its phases, or any of its phases? Any of its phases. Do you know what that means? If so, how does it apply to Greenwich?
Wow. There was a book that famously wasn't, can anyone remember what it was? 10 years ago, a book that...
Frank Morehouse's books?
It was one of Frank Morehouse's books, the late Frank Morehouse, exactly. Grand Days didn't qualify. How does it apply to Greenwich? Well, Greenwich is set in Australia, so I suppose it sneaks through. There has been some discussion, I think, about potentially changing that criteria, but you're the lawyer, Jock. I think it's a difficult thing to do. I think it's part of the bequest of the estate, so I don't think it's going to change in a hurry, and that's okay. I think that those terms aren't too limiting, depending on how they're applied. I might take the opportunity, however, to say that I hadn't met Jennifer until that morning at the airport, and I'd never really been to any literary things, so I was like...
I'm sorry.
I was like the world's largest prep child, being taken first day of school, and she just guided me around, led me around, and history, and I felt, absolutely... The thing about Jennifer winning the Miles Franklin, I'm going to say this because she's not allowed to say it, because there's certain sort of things that go with being the winner, I think, that you have to say things about luck and, luck really. But at some point last year, I sent a message to Joe and said, I've read the Miles Franklin winner. It's Bodies of Light. It had just come out, and my viewpoint didn't waver. And when the long list came out, I looked on the long list, my viewpoint didn't waver. And we can talk about luck and that sort of thing, but there is, as people who read, we all have different tastes and different ideas, but we can agree as a literary community that King Lear is a great play, or that Carpentaria is a novel of power and importance. And so, to me, it would have been a travesty if Bodies of Light wasn't the book that was chosen, because it was I believe a book of more lasting significance and quality than the others on there. Judges don't always get it right, there's some weird things. But when Drop Bear won the Stella this year, I thought it would and should, and it did. It is, the right books can be the winners, and so that, and the fact that you led me around like a large prep child made me feel very comfortable with the decision.
I paid Michael to say this.
Just sticking with Evelyn Araluen for a moment, she said a thing in her, if you haven't seen this already, you really should. There's a YouTube of her acceptance speech for the Stella, which is an incredibly powerful piece of speaking. But one of the things she says is that, I'm probably paraphrasing, prizes are nice and all that, but writers shouldn't have to build their financial hopes around winning something that ultimately they can't control. And it's not a substitute for a living wage. Can you guys talk a little bit about that, maybe?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I had had lunch with writers today, and Jen was one of them, and we went around the table, and Chris Flynn said, "Oh, I'll pay because, you know, I've got a job," and everyone said, Melissa said, "Well, I've got a full-time job," and Jennifer said, "Well, I've got a full-time job, and I've got a full-time job," and none of our full-time jobs are creative writing, and it's just a problem, you know, that you actually have to choose between a significantly lower income or not having time to do the work you need to do. And you know, Jen's won a significant amount of money, but yeah, if she was a plumber, she would make that money in 3 or 4 months. Instead, she wrote a book that took her 5 years or something. You know, it's just, and she's the winner. It's not sustainable.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No,
No,
I was going to say, if you feel comfortable sharing, sorry, I'm really throwing you under the bus, but what you were saying at lunch about the graph that you made for Writer's Essay.
Oh, I said it this morning.
Oh, sorry.
I said it this morning. But I mean, that speaks to me not getting good for a long time. But yeah, you know, I've written fiction in each of the last 40 years, and I've had fiction published in 6 of those years, and that's 34 years of trying and failing. So it's a tough thing, and there's not enough money in it, and if as a nation we can't get, you know, Jen or Jock or Melissa or Chris or Chloe or, you know, everyone here, if we can't get them at their desk writing for longer periods of time, we're not going to get the books that we could have, and that makes me really sad.
I have really mixed feelings about this, right? Because on one hand, I believe in a universal basic income. I am a socialist in almost all respects of my kind of personal politics. I also feel like it's really important for writers to have a connection with the real world, because otherwise you just got your head up your ass all the time. And that's why I think a lot of writers are really insufferable. And I'm not going to name names, but I think I think it's really important to be in the real world. And I think, obviously, at the moment, the only people who can afford to write full time either come from generational wealth or make huge buck off their books, which is a very slim, percentage of the writing population. And I don't think that's right. But I also, I have a weird chip on my shoulder about being a writer, because to me, it's. I understand the argument that art is important and art for art's sake is important, but at the end of the day, there's always a part of me that's if the government tomorrow was we're going to give every artist $50,000 a year, there's still a part of my brain, to be honest, and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot by saying this, there's a part of me that's why are we giving that to hospitals and paramedics? I just think there are harder jobs out there than being a writer. And I really reject the mythologization, of art. No, I just thought I should realise it. I just think, I agree with everything you said.
No, I agree with everything you say as well.
I just think at the end of the day, I think yes, the arts needs more funding. Absolutely. Evelyn's speech almost brought me to tears. I could listen to it every day and feel kind of this rousing sense of fury and also, motivation to make things better. I also think that we shouldn't put artists of any kind, but especially writers, on any kind of pedestal. It's a job of work, and there are harder and nobler jobs of work, and I think to be in service of somebody else, is in my opinion, the best thing you can do. And most writers don't do that. I don't think I do that necessarily. That's fine. It's fine to do things for aesthetic purposes. I'm not a complete aesthetic, monk about it. I big complex feelings about it. I don't know the answer.
I think I agree with you because I have a wife who's a nurse and an ambulance driver. And she goes and does whatever she does. and she comes home and says, "What have you been up to?" And I've moved a few commas around. One of the things I was really happy about your shortlisting was that it seemed to me to be a big nod to experimentation, that it was a real endorsement of doing something wild. Does that mean for you that, did you take it that way and you want to keep being an experimental writer, or does it incline you to do something more perhaps expected?
I don't know, Jock. I've barely written a word in anger since that, and that was 3 years ago or something. Clearly it's not going to be a career for me, so I'm in a very liberated position. No one's relying on me to write anything. They might prefer that I didn't, I might prefer that I didn't. So because of that, I can, I'll self-publish again if I have to. I don't know what I will do. Part of me thinks that I would like to do something, even a little bit wilder, and then the other part of me thinks, why not try something more conventional? But I don't know the answer.
Jim, what about you? Do you feel like winning the prize will change the way you approach the task at all in the future?
Maybe. I don't know, I just started writing something new, and I don't think it's the prize actually. It's structurally more experimental than anything I've done before. I was inspired by Michael. No, it's just like I think it was Crispin who this morning said, like, I want to learn something new with everything I write. Otherwise, like, why would you bother? Like, and that's there are plenty of writers who can kind of stick to a formula, and I don't mean to besmirch them or anything, but for me, I don't know, there's something so satisfying about like the intellectual and emotional, the cognitive aspects of writing, that I don't want to just reproduce things that I've done before. And so I've always thought I was really bad at structure, and I started to think, over the last couple of years about different ways you can shape a story, and what does it mean to kind of tell a story in not just a non-linear way, but in a way that subverts that sort of Aristotelian tradition of a three-act structure. I read a really amazing book I've been recommending to everybody called Spiral, Meander, Explode by Jane Allison. It's tremendously readable. I guess you would call it theory, but I'm not a theory person. Don't like an academic text particularly. And it's eminently readable. She draws on a lot of really beautiful contemporary examples from, like everyone from Murray Vale to, just really, really beautiful writer. And she looks at different, possibilities for narrative structure. And three of those are the spiral, the meander, and the kind of explosion, which is interesting because I've heard Michael talk about the exploded novel, and I can't remember which came first, whether I read Jane Allison's book or
I'm
heard
sure
you
no,
say that.
I was first.
Yeah, sorry, of course. But yeah, just that it's really interesting to think of, ways of kind of breaking that traditional structure, and of course there are people who've done it before, it's not, it's just that we're so used to superimposing this idea of beginning, middle, end, and kind of rising action, climax, denouement. How could we? What would a kind of structure look like if we were able to bend it, or use different words, or conceive of architecture differently when it comes to narrative? So I think I'm doing things differently, but it has nothing to do with the prize, and more just to do with really not wanting to be bored.
Yeah.
But like terminal fear of boredom, so we've got to do something different.
You make me think of that Colin McCann novel, Hiragon,
Yeah.
which is it's about the Middle East, and it's based on the 1001 Nights. So it's 500 chapters ascending, then there's one crucial chapter in the middle, and then 500 chapters descending. And it sounds like the worst gimmick of all time. It works. So just before I hand over perhaps to you guys to ask questions, there's one final thing I wanted to cover, which is the unsung heroes in all of this, the people who judge books. And it's a pretty massive task, I think, no matter which prize you're talking about. Have either of you ever done it?
I judged the PFLW's unpublished manuscript award 1 year, and I have judged short story prizes on occasion, but I've never judged, I've never been in a position where I've had to read, kind of dozens upon dozens or hundreds of published books like you would for Miles Franklin. And honestly, the idea really, I find really terrifying. I don't think I would ever do it. That's terribly daunting to me. And then kind of, I had a friend who was on the Stellar Prize judging panel this year, and of course, they were eminently professional in how they described the experience, but it sounded really fraught, and that was not because they didn't like the other people on there or there was a clash of personalities. It's a really difficult task to, effectively put one book above another and wrestle with everybody's competing preferences and biases and I think it's a terrifying prospect. So I really take my hat off to anybody who's done it.
No, I judge writing constantly, Jock, but never in an official capacity. No, I'm going to meet up later this week with BJ Silcox, who's a critic who's based in Canberra and who was incredibly kind about my book, and she just dropped me a note and said she's judging something at the moment, and it's funny that you take on something you love so much, which is reading, and then you have to read 100 books and 97 of them you loathe. It's pretty rough.
We might hand it over to you guys at this point. Would anyone like to ask a question while we're all together with... Yes, Chris. Matt Nicholas from the ABS.
This is based on that point about judging. Years ago, I was asked to judge the Age Book of the Year, the fiction section. And a lot of things people might not know about that was I got a huge box of books sent to my house as the other judge, and I put them all on the floor according to the publisher, because I wanted to see what each publisher had submitted. And I noticed there was just 4 books from each publisher, and sometimes quite odd choices. And when I called up the Jason at the Age and said, "What's the deal?" He said, "Oh, they're only allowed to submit 4 books each." And I said, "There's some very odd choices here." And he said, "Yes, sometimes it's in the author's contract that their book has to be submitted to prizes. And so if it's not in your contract, your book might not even be submitted to the prize." And I said, "Well, there's some here that I would like to have considered that weren't submitted." He said, "In that case, we'd have to request them." So myself and the other judge, Joe, requested a bunch of books that were not submitted to us. And 2 of them made the shortlist. And 1 of them won the prize. So there's interesting things about prizes that are not necessarily... Maybe I shouldn't be saying this.
Is there anybody else out there?
Jean, I just wanted to challenge a little bit. I was interested in Jock, you talking about your wife, in service, and I wonder, Jen, whether you see yourself in service to those of us who read, and for whom the work becomes an inspiration and food for thought, and sometimes in a world that becomes a bit tepid or ordinary, whether your service to us is profound, that there's a gift that we have from you to us in enlarging our lives. Do you see that sense of service in what you do? Because for me, that's what it does.
Thank you. I feel like I'm about to cry. So, I won't do that in public. That's the nicest thing, or nice is such a shit word. That is the kind of greatest honour that you could hope for as a writer, I think, is that your work has resonance or moves people, or whatever word you want to use, inspires them in some way. But at the same time, it just feels like such a lofty ambition. And I know because I read books and they move me in such a profound way. And I think this text literally changed my life, or it changed the way I think about X, Y, Z, or it changed the way I use language. I know that is possible, but on the other side as a writer, and I don't know if you feel the same about this, or as a writer, it often feels like quite an academic or aesthetic job of work that you're doing compared to, I guess, most of my friends work in either community services or social services, or teachers and nurses, and I think particularly during the pandemic, I found it personally difficult to. I'm not saying this is the right attitude either. Like I found it difficult to conceive what I do as kind of a useful or worthwhile pursuit. That being said, like if it brought you or anybody else comfort or whatever, that's the nicest thing I could possibly hope to achieve.
I think in a world of misinformation and the search for truth, that we need people who write to make sense of things for us in a way that has integrity. If we undersell that by saying it doesn't have the worth of other things in comparison, then we do the world a disservice, I think. I think there's a social good here, a human good, that I think you undersell yourself, and I think the role
Are you talking to my therapist? Sonia, are you here?
I just think it's so important, and that yes, the idea of a universal basic income, it's deserved. I think that we can't say it's not deserved because it's not a nurse, or I've come out of education, but it's not in that sphere. I think we have to value it or it's gone, and the loss of the arts is a cruelty to the world. So I think you're.
I think on that note, folks, and that was a lovely note, thank you, we ought to wrap up. Thanks very much for coming along. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Mick. It's been lovely, and yes, cheers to you all.